All right, well, now I'd like to welcome our panel. So please give a round of applause to Barbara and the rest of the panel.
Great. So thank you for coming, and thank you, Richard, for putting this together. To me, it's an honor to be surrounded by all these great scientists, and I'm very humbled to learn from the best. And the goal for today, I think for you guys is, again, it's just to learn from the best. And I would like for each of you to introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about your background, especially your company and the main project of your company. And we can just go down the road and we can kick it off.
Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Sam Kintz. I'm currently the CEO and co-founder of EnLiven Therapeutics. My company focuses on small molecule approaches to clinically validated oncology targets. It's not a sexy research platform, but my co-founder and I, who have been working in industry for myself 15 years, him 30 years, have spent a lot of time thinking about ways to improve on existing drugs and looking in particular for areas in cancer where through clinically validated pathways there's an opportunity to improve or get ahead of disease, and specifically around CNS metastases, so breast cancer, lung cancer. A lot of disease progression now is through escape to the brain, and so if we can make better molecules to address those problems, that's a main focus of us. Also, resistance in cancer is a major focus, and lots of opportunities to get ahead of where cancer will end up through better chemistry, really. But my background, as you may have guessed, is in chemistry. I do not have a PhD. I began in industry actually at Genentech and worked for 6 years as a medicinal chemist in that group. So that was sort of my introduction to research science really at the bench. Transitioned from there into a role with Roche Venture Fund and got exposure to investing in life science and thinking about sort of the business aspects of early startup companies. Decided to go back to business school, so I actually went back to Stanford for an MBA, and during that time helped start a few companies with the Roche Venture Fund and some other investors that were mentioned on that screen. Joined one of those companies as head of business development and strategy, helped grow that company to kind of a commercial product stage, and then decided to get back into research for therapeutics, joined StemCentrx as head of business development and strategy in 2015. We then were acquired by AbbVie, a very large deal, and after that was asked to lead the research organization at that site for AbbVie in South San Francisco. So I spent 3 years leading an R&D organization spanning from early target discovery to first-in-human studies, and then decided to start this new company last year.
Hi, everyone. My name is Leah Sibener. I'm one of the co-founders of 3T Biosciences. So 3T spun out of Stanford in late 2017, out of Chris Garcia's lab, where both myself and my co-founder Marvin G did our PhDs. We developed a platform that can identify novel targets in solid tumors. So as you guys are probably all aware, immunotherapy is really, really exciting right now. And one of the biggest needs in the field is for new targets. If you think about one of kind of the breakthrough therapeutics, it's checkpoint inhibitors. Really, we want to understand why do some people's immune response recognize tumors, and we want to understand what are the specificities of those cells that have these complete responses in these patients. So we have a platform that can identify basically what your immune system actually recognizes in these tumors and make therapeutics out of it. So we are a relatively small company. We're based in Menlo Park, 15 people, and raised a seed round in 2017. So basically went straight from my PhD to this company where we've been building out the team, developing the strategy, and really excited to be here and hopefully share some insights with all of you today.
Hello. Hi, I'm Zehnder. I'm one of the co-founders and the CEO of Fauna Bio. And I'll start actually with asking a quick question. So how many people know somebody that survived a heart attack or a stroke? My dad had one 2003. Okay, keep your hands up. Not done. Okay. How many people know someone who survived 25 heart attacks or strokes? Right? Okay. It doesn't really happen in people. But there are many animals, including the 13-line ground squirrel, which is one of the ones that we study, that can survive the human equivalent of 25 heart attacks or strokes every year during their hibernation season and do that every year and keep on living. So unfortunately, pharmaceutical companies really only think about developing drugs based on humans and mice that we've somewhat deranged to look like humans. And they don't realize that there's a third option, right? We sit on the tip of an evolutionary spectrum, and genomics is at a point now where we really can leverage evolutionary genomics to find better drug targets and find novel ways to treat human disease. So that's really what we do. We look at animals that have developed natural disease resistance through their evolutionary biology, and we have a platform that identifies novel drug targets, and then we work on those ourselves, and then we also have done a discovery partnership with a large pharma looking particularly at metabolic disease and obesity. So my background is I'm a clinical veterinarian. So I did a residency at UC Davis focused on non-traditional animal models or companion exotics, and people don't know what companion exotics are. They're anything you can keep as a pet that is not a dog or cat, okay? So it depends on what state you live in defines what your specialty is, right? Okay. But all joking aside, so I came to Stanford to do a cancer biology PhD because I was really interested in why certain animals get tumors and why some don't. And then I connected with who ended up being my co-founders during my postdoc in Carlos Bustamante's lab at Stanford. We were all working on very different projects, but all working on this idea of novel animal models. So my co-founder, Linda Goodman, is a comparative genomicist who did training at the Broad. My CSO is a hibernation biologist who did the first GWAS study in hibernating ground squirrels. And so the three of us really had this perfect trifecta of expertise to build this particular company. So we spun out in May, June of 2018 and went into an aging and age-related diseases accelerator called Age One, which I highly recommend. It's a great mentorship program. And then we raised a proper seed round just in the very tag end of 2018 that got us started. So right now we're 7 going on 8 people because we're hiring right now. But yeah.
Hi everybody, I'm Liz Shepard. I'm a co-founder of Novome Biotechnologies. And my co-founders and I started Novome about 4 years ago based on some work that Weston Whitaker and I were doing in Justin Sonnenberg's lab at Stanford. I was a PhD student in Justin's lab and Wes was a postdoc. And we were working on developing tools for engineering bacteria native to the human gut. And so we started Novome with the goal of developing engineered bacteria that could colonize the gut as therapeutics. So that's what we're focusing on now. And over the last 4 years, we've gone from having just $500,000 that we were fortunate enough to raise from a group of family and friends to an SBIR grant to a seed funding round from 5AM Ventures to generate some in vivo proof of concept data, taking this platform to develop a candidate for our lead program. And then we just a few weeks ago closed our Series A to bring our lead program into the clinic in the next year, which we're really excited about. So super happy to be here and hopefully can provide some insights for you all.
Hi everyone, I'm Maria Soloveychik, co-founder and CEO of SyntheX. So SyntheX wasn't actually a spin-out. This was ideation stage company where my co-founder and I were, he was a grad student across the hall and we just got together over beers and we're trying to think what are the biggest bottlenecks right now in drug discovery because we had a good list of targets. A lot of those are what is now considered to be undruggable. They're not your canonical kinases or whatever you typically would go after or extracellular proteins that you can go after with an antibody. A lot of signaling pathways depend on protein-protein interactions. And that's both being hardcore yeast geneticists, which is what we use during our PhDs. We know that yeast is now used to map giant maps of protein-protein interactions across different species. So we're trying to think of, is there a way of actually using the same yeast to find molecules that can actually disrupt the interactions that people are studying. So we came up with a system on a piece of paper that we thought, hey, this could be a really good system for doing this. If we can get this platform off the ground, it could be pretty powerful for finding these really good disruptors of PPIs as a selection as opposed to a screen. So we were shopping that idea around. This was in Toronto, Canada, so not exposed to any VC landscapes like we are here. I don't think we've ever had a talk in Canada about VC in grad school, so you guys are very lucky to have this. And there we were thinking, how do we raise money? Family and friends would have given us like $500, so that was an option. And this would have bought us maybe a part-time garage because there's no incubator spaces at the time. Now there's JLabs there. So things have changed, but still not great. So then we heard about this place in San Francisco called Indie Bio. They would give you $200K and a lab space for 4 months. And we're like, oh, this can't be real. This is probably something wonky happening there. So I reached out to somebody that I knew that went through their first batch, and he's like, yeah, it's legit. They give you lab space and money. So so we applied. We pitched them the idea for the platform. There was nothing yet built at all. We just told them this is physically possible to do. And if we can get it done and it works as well as we hope it would, this could be pretty cool. And hopefully pharma companies will really care about this when it works. It took us about like a few months to actually build it to show a prototype that it'll get done, but it took us 2 years to tweak it to make it perfect. So we're at a point a year ago where we would have typically spun it out of an academic lab or would have been confident enough and had the patents to spin it. But the pro is the IP is fully owned by us. We didn't have to deal with any licensing negotiations, which in universities here is better, but in Canada it would have been really painful, as I'm sure some people here know. So we got to own the whole thing. It was incredibly stressful. It was very make it or break it, but it makes you a nice binary company, so you'll get from 0 to 1. So that's after the Indie Bio program, we were really frugal with the money. It lasted us for almost a year. And then we raised the seed round in 2017, around April, and that lasted us for a while. And now we're going out to raise our Series A now that we have a lot more data.
That's wonderful and awesome. And I noticed that I didn't say even my name. So I'm Barbara Alcaraz Silva, and I used to be a scientist by training. I have a PhD in molecular biology. When I did my postdoc at UCSF, and another scientist and I, we started a company. We were not successful though, because I think we had different priorities, and started working with an angel group called Life Science Angels, and eventually until the bank hired me. And what I do at the bank, I lead the early stage life science practice, NorCal, Seattle. And I work with, pre-Series A companies. So all of you guys are SBB clients. Some of the ones that raise Series A, I don't work with you guys because you're graduating from my portfolio. So that's great. But going back to, you guys, how was that transition of, especially for you, Sam, because you have a very strong pharma background. You did venture. I'm guessing that the transition for you, building the company, was easier, or for you guys, straight from academia. How was that transitioning? When did you make the decision that you wanted to start a company?
Yeah, so as you can kind of hear, my background is much different, and I think what maybe the big difference is I spent 15 years kind of developing experience in how to discover and progress kind of through phase 1 clinical trials, drug candidates. And so really the major investment thesis for my company, if I kind of put my shoes in the investor's shoes, and I've been in those shoes, was really around the team and its ability to progress molecules that would be active in humans. And so for me, the biggest reason for starting this company was actually just working with my co-founders, right? And being able to, frankly, get back into the weeds. Because I had spent the 3 years prior to that working on, a big kind of platform with a huge group, 150 scientists, where organizationally you kind of get bogged down and kind of in this band of a 30,000 person company where you're kind of that VP level I call it middle management. You don't get to work on the science, right? And you're around just brilliant people that aren't like finely tuned into the key problems, and I think there's a lot of missed opportunity there. So for me to start this company, it was really about how do we take a few very specific ideas. They don't have to be brand new ideas. In fact, where we're going to execute is where we already know there's a path forward, and if we can fix this problem through better drugs and better drug hunting and execute on that, we get to day-to-day take the top talent in this industry and all work on the same problems in a given moment. And so for me, it was sort of this refreshing escape from pharma, frankly. But more it was about the ability to get back into the science. And so, yeah, I do think it was easier when I decided to start the company to go and raise money. In fact, I had trouble taking less money. And you kind of, these are good sets of problems to have, but it really was a bet on the team. And now the responsibility and the accountability that comes from having raised money is kind of the bigger problem. So yeah, certainly the experience in pharma helped for kind of knowing how to frame what it is we're doing, and how to articulate, what it is how it's different from what other people are doing. And then it wasn't a high bar to kind of convince people that we know how to kind of operate and execute. And I think there's a lot of stuff that you do early on, on the financing side, on the legal side, on the operations side, and then certainly on the research side, right? Because there's science and then there's drug discovery, and they go together, but it's often, the things you see in lab don't often translate into the clinic. And so having that in a founding team and being able to convince investors that we could kind of navigate that, I think was key and made it a lot easier.
That I agree, and I think that definitely helps because, I see a lot of founders, especially, coming out of your PhDs, and you hit a point that, wait a minute, we need to change the team, especially the investors, right? Because you don't have that drug discovery background. So, I would love to hear your guys' perspective in terms of, the transition from, your PhDs creating this company, and maybe one challenge that you're facing right now at this point in your company.
Sure. Okay, so I'll start. So coming straight from a PhD, I think we had the opposite problem of Sam, where we were relatively inexperienced in starting a company or progressing, making a platform from an academics level scale to an industry level scale. And that was the big challenge with what we had to do, basically translating something from academia to a really full-fledged industry scale, both target identification platform and also therapeutic identification platform. And one of the things that we did early on was hire an experienced CSO. So our CSO, Hans-Peter Gerber, has both been on the big pharma side of things, so he was one of the CSOs at Pfizer. He also really has been a mentor to us throughout this whole process, both from, basically navigating that space from science to drug development, actually scaling and asking the right questions, because I think in science sometimes there are a lot of really interesting problems. And when you're in a startup, you have to stay focused. That's one of the things that I've really taken to heart throughout this whole thing, is really staying focused, because there's so much opportunity, especially with these types of platforms that I think most of us have been building. There's so many directions you can go, and how do you navigate the choices that you have, and where do you focus and where do you really hone in? And I think that was one of the big, maybe not challenges, but something you really had to focus on learning how to do properly.
I'll second a lot of that. I didn't have any industry experience before starting the company, and I agree that we're also a fairly broad platform, although we focus in cardiovascular and neuro. So yeah, there's a lot of things that you can do, but you won't make progress if you try to do all of them. So it's important to do that. I think one of the things that we struggle with, because we're a little bit of a different flavor of a company, is translating what we do to non-science people. We do very good in a room with science people. We do that really well. We don't do so good in a room of people who don't know what genomics is, right? So learning how to explain what you do in a way that people can understand the impact of what you're doing, that is a learned skill. So I'm still learning.
Yeah, that's a really, really good point. And sort of to jump off of that a little bit for us, I think one of the interesting transitions from doing academic work on engineering gut bacteria to trying to translate that into a product we could convince people we could sell someday in the future it's something that nobody has successfully done yet in terms of making a drug that's an engineered bacterium, certainly not a colonizing engineered bacterium, and figuring out how to convince people that doctors in the clinic and the FDA was ready for that was a really interesting challenge. It was really easy when you're in a room of, academics, you're giving a seminar and everyone's excited about it and it's this kind of cool new idea, but then to go to investors and say, oh yeah, we can definitely, FDA is going to be okay with this, like we can put this into people, that was a really interesting kind of challenge early on. I think on the personal side for me, one of the challenges was just diving in. I kind of went into grad school knowing I wanted to go into industry and do drug development. I was always super excited about the idea of using my expertise in biology to make something really tangible. But I always figured I'd go to like a Genentech or an Amgen or a big company, you know. And so when we kind of got the idea to start Novome, on the personal side, it was kind of like, can I do this? You know, like, do I have the chops to go out, strike out on our own, and keep up with the fast pace of the startup environment? And so that was kind of an interesting transition from academia to industry, to go to really small scale industry for people. But yeah, it's been, I mean, an incredible learning experience. And I think in terms of a challenge we're facing now, I think kind of like what Sam said, it's like you get the money and then you're like, oh, now we really have to do stuff. You know, it's like you think getting the money is the challenge, and then you get it and it's wonderful, and then you're like, oh, now milestones. It's like, okay, hire and grow and scale and juggle, and yeah, it's good.
Yeah, so kind of jumping off of that, I think it was a very steep learning curve, especially on all the business terms, like, you know, what's common stock, like figuring out the very basics right away. But I think what scientists are really good at is learning how to learn. Like that's the one thing that we really can figure out, like where to find the resources, how to like filter information based on, you know, the crap metric of it and get a nice reliable source for you to actually learn how to do it. So I was a little OCD and I would learn how to do every role in the company before kind of outsourcing it, so I can understand what goes into at least the hiring process, even what's, you know, good look like, how much time it should take, or, you know, accounting, like basic things that you should have an understanding of when it's your business. And it's fairly easy. I mean, everything is teachable to a degree. And the scientific communication was also a big part of it, because we're taught to give a science talk. And my first pitch was a science talk where I was like dwelling on promoters, and nobody cares. I thought it was super cool. A few scientists in the room did too, but most of the investors were just glazed over. So I'm trying to understand, what do they find important? What to put into a pitch deck in terms of like, what's your IP standpoint? Like, how are you protecting this? How are you differentiated from others? Your product market fit, which is kind of where the focus comes in. Because for platforms, yeah, you could do just about anything. You can do agriculture if you wanted to. But it's a matter of what will people pay you for right away, and then where you can go from there, and doing the things you want to do after you actually validate it in a certain system. And there's actually kind of like a flip side, where with a platform company, you don't necessarily want to hyper specialize into one asset, because then you become an asset company where you have a single asset and that's the only thing that they're going to see you for. So you try to diversify a little bit and show that you can do multiple different things before you go out pitching with a lead asset, hopefully.
Great. So then this is actually a great, you know, sidetrack and focusing on the business model of the company, right? So so how you, Maria, for you, just building up how you were able to determine your business model and deciding this is what we want to do and the market that we want to pursue.
Yeah, that was actually also one of those learning points, where with the drug discovery platform, as soon as we built it, we're like, oh, this is cool. Farmers will be excited and want to use this. But because we were nobodies, we didn't have like the typical big names on our team. We talked to farmers and they're like, well, if your platform's cool, why don't you use it? And we're like, fair point. So then we did. And then that's when we turned into a drug development company, because once you have an asset that looks pretty good, why would you let it go right away? And you don't want to divert and become a CRO by essentially doing projects for others. So then we're now fully dedicated to doing internal programs as opposed to worrying about partnerships at this stage. Eventually it'll become logical, where we have enough confidence in our team's ability to execute from discovery to, you know, phase 1, hopefully. And at that point, we'll be ready for actual partnerships and bring in revenue in this way.
And how was that process for you, Sam? I mean, it must be easier, yes.
Yeah, so I mean, I think you guys, and I was nodding as you were speaking, because I think a big trap for really cool science is kind of the CRO service trap, right? Because pharma, our business is drugs, right? And I think that's where value creation comes. If you're pursuing a therapeutics approach, I think there are also interesting business models for research tools and diagnostics, but they're wildly different. So for us, you know, the business model market case was always easy, right? Because you can look at, you know, prevalence within a tumor type, and you know, based on what drugs are being charged, or priced at, what creates a market. And in cancer, it's not that many patients. So for us, we've always decided that as a medicinal chemistry oriented company, we were going to develop drugs, and that was a big driver for us in doing this. And then I think as you think about founding the company and the amount of money you take and how far it's going to get you, what value are you creating at each stage, and what are the major inflection points? So that becomes really the business model for the biotech. And then you got to overlay that with what you think you can do and know and what you need others to do. And so for us, we have a vision of we want to be able to go all the way to like human proof of concept, but not so excited about building a global commercial development company, right? That requires billions of dollars to do, and there's expertise that we don't have. I think, though, there's always a tension between, acting like you can and kind of setting that direction, because that's your leverage when somebody comes to buy your drug or buy your assets, is are they going to just go it alone? And today you can, and there's enough private investors. You can also go to public markets to go all the way, but a big tension, for us will be, what do we want to be, and how far do we take it? And so being very, very thoughtful, because as soon as you get to that lead compound, the economics change drastically. It's a very expensive business. And so for scientific founders, you think through this early, right? Because you will get diluted very, very quickly. And so where are you going to get to, and what value will that earn you? It goes beyond kind of the end game, and the business model is all the way through. So I don't know, there's kind of a lot there, but something to think about for people interested in starting companies.
I'll make a quick comment about partnerships, because this is something we thought about quite a lot. And like I said, we have done one discovery stage partnership, and for us it was an opportunity to work with a team that's working on something completely different we're working on, and has the ability to quickly functionally validate targets that we don't have to spin up assays for. And so for us, part of what we're doing for the seed round is really optimizing our target discovery algorithms, essentially. So more functional data helps us do that faster. And so, but you cannot do too many of them, you become a CRO, and there's this really fine cliff to walk, and it's just, you have to be a little bit careful, but it can be done strategically, I guess I would say.
Great, awesome. So are any people in the audience thinking and building a company? Any PhD students? Okay. Yeah, woman. Awesome. So, your team, can you tell us more about your team and how you were able to find the right co-founders, or decide, okay, I want to work with you, or, you can be my employee only. So building your team, which is very critical in building the company. So how you guys were able, and where do you find your co-founder?
Happy to start there. I think that's one of the things I didn't appreciate about what it meant to start your own company before we did it, which was the ability to build your own team. And I think when you're in academia and working independently, and you kind of get to be a little bit siloed if you want to be, if you're not out seeking a lot of collaborations. I really underappreciated how much it means to have a team that you are excited to come to work with every day and engage with and be transparent with and deal with the hard problems. And so I think that's been one of the major wins or upsides of starting your own company, which is awesome. And in terms of kind of how we assembled or started, I think we got super lucky because I was, as I mentioned, working with a postdoc, Weston Whitaker, and he had two colleagues at Berkeley from his grad lab, one who was really interested in starting companies and had always said to him, if you ever think about it, call me, we should do this. And so Wes and I would always joke, oh yeah, when in Silicon Valley, start a company. And then one day he comes in and he's like, I think we should actually do it. We had beers with Will and it just ended up being very serendipitous. We got really fortunate that the four of us all gelled and were willing to be super honest with each other, even about the hard stuff. And I think that just takes, really fuels you when you can really trust your founding team. And then expanding past that, making the first hire, that's like, you have no idea what you're doing. We hired an RA as our first hire, and got really lucky again. She was awesome, but you can only do so much when you're interviewing somebody for your first hire. And I think taking an eye really and thinking about to the culture always, with every hire you make and every kind of activity that's not directly related to, milestones and research, in terms of building the company culture and how you do meetings and how you do feedback and how you do communication, and transparency, I think is huge for building out a good culture. That kind of went a little beyond the question, but hopefully that is helpful.
Yeah, that was super comprehensive. I would second that. Your founding team is probably the most important thing. It really dictates the direction of every decision you make. So I was lucky enough to know my co-founder for like 6 years in grad school, so I knew him really well. I knew what he was good at, I knew what he wasn't. I was comfortable enough to tell him when things weren't working. I guess the really nice thing about being in incubators is that you get to learn from other people's mistakes as well as your own, if you have that skill. So then you get to see a lot of like decisions being made because co-founder egos were clashing, or just like, teams would just fall apart, and then each co-founder would start their own thing that's very similar to the initial thing, and it just reflects poorly on the whole thing. So making sure that you're aligned, not just for what the project is going to be, but how you foresee the company going. This is going to be like a 5 or 10 year expedition, depending on what you're working on. So you should be able to work with that person for at least that long, and make sure they want to exit in a similar style. If you want to stay with a company forever, but they're just looking to flip it in 3 years and make the money and go to something else, you should really clear that out right away. And then also assigning the roles, because let's say if you're 2 PhDs, it's really hard to figure out who's going to be doing what. You're both essentially CSOs. One of you is better emailing, so they become the CEO. And then naturally kind of built into your roles of like, oh, okay, so now I do the outward facing things, and he gets to be in the lab doing fun things, and I do fun things later. So trying to decide on those roles and the details right away will make your life a lot easier than both of you doing redundant things. So my co-founder and I were just the two of us until we raised the seed round, so for a bit over a year. We were lucky in the sense that we could do the things that we wanted to do, so we didn't have to hire anyone right away. So we were essentially at ND Bio pitching investors during the day, and then after hours in the lab doing the experiments for about a year. And that was actually a really good thing, because we didn't have to interview or hire. And it's really important in the beginning, because when you're writing patents, you need the data to be done quickly. You don't have the downtime to train someone, redo their work, and then actually get the data. So it's important to run fast, and it's important to get people that can get in running, as opposed to having the backlog of like half a year. And that's kind of the pace change between academia and industry. So in academia, you can design an experiment in a way that you'll have to repeat it 4 times, and it's fine because your time is endless. Whereas here, there's like a really real end date of when your money runs out. So you better get the experiment designed to be perfect the first time around and get a result that's not a maybe, but it's a yes or no, and you can design the next one over. So that's on the team side. And then essentially once we raised money and we can guarantee that people will have salaries for at least a few years, that's when we started hiring and expanding the team slowly.
So I have a very similar story to both Liz and Maria. So me and my co-founder Marvin, we worked together on the platform, basically saw each other every day for 4 years before that. So I knew I worked really well with him, and we had complementary skill sets. So that was really important. I think just at the baseline of all that is trust. So both trust in scientific judgment, but also trust in communication, just being able to say, I don't think this is the right thing to do, and having just an honest discussion about everything, not just science, but also business-related things, the direction of the company, if there are problems at the company, how you work these things out. It's so important, and if there's that clash, it can really it can be really hard to deal with, especially if you don't know how well you work with people. So I think the founding team is quite important. And then on hiring, I think the team you hire is everything. We're very, very always mindful of the culture, because a single person who doesn't mesh well with the team or isn't a team player really derails the whole operation. And when you're at a startup, it's a little bit different from academia, where you kind of have your one project and you work on it, and that's kind of your ticket, and that's, you graduate, you get papers, etc. The incentive structure at a startup is like all of you guys are in this one project together, and how to get people with that mentality and that mindset is really important, and trying to get everyone to buy into this one idea, and to get everyone to say, oh, I can't, if someone needs help covering on an experiment or something, someone's always got your back no matter what. So really being able to build that culture up, and making sure that other people agree with it is really important.
Okay, so maybe I'll answer this a different way, because I completely agree with everything they said. I mean, it's critical, both early hires, all hires, but especially the early hires, and your co-founder. So my co-founder, I've been working with him for 12 years. In fact, he was my boss's boss when I joined at Genentech, and I think probably one of the best medicinal chemists in the world. He's going to have 3 approved drugs in cancer that he invented. So to be around somebody like that, I mean, yeah, he doesn't have lots of top-notch publications, but he's got 150 issued patents, and has a great nose for hunting drugs. And so I learned really everything I know about medicinal chemistry and drug hunting from my founder. And I had the opportunity to hire him 3 years ago at AbbVie to lead one of my groups. So we've had this kind of interesting dynamic where, I worked for him, he worked for me, and we've just become, really good friends along the way. But it's always been around what we're passionate about in the science. And what I love about him is he's just open to learn from anybody, and he's very, very humble. So it's somebody I knew I could start a company with. And we've been talking about starting a company, or really pursuing these programs, which we've turned into a company for over a decade. So it just felt right, and it was really about timing. But maybe what could be valuable, because I kind of offer a little bit of a different flavor of a young co-founder. I came at this a much different way, where I'm sort of the counterpart to the brilliant scientists. These women are all much smarter than I am. I didn't invent anything. So I represent sort of the scientist that knows enough to be dangerous business person that the scientists, the true genius, partnered with to start a company, right? And so for those of you who are great scientists, someone made a comment earlier about scientists being able to solve problems and figure it out. I think it was you. That really resonates with me. I mean, I've hired lots of people. I've hired them for science roles. I've hired them for business roles. For the business roles, I always hire scientists, even if they don't have experience, because I think you can learn great communication. You can learn, deal tactics. You can learn negotiation. It's tough to kind of teach intuition around solving very difficult problems. And so for those of you that are scientists that are interested in entrepreneurship but maybe don't have that brilliant idea now, I think there are lots of different paths you can take. And you heard about BCBA. It's an organization I'm passionate about. You can learn about how to kind of transition into industry and different types of roles. And it doesn't have to be now, right? You can kind of learn and build a rounded skill set, and find those partners and founders for the future, and then come at this same thing just from a different direction. So I would encourage you to do that. There's lots of time to have a huge impact in this industry.
Or even think about banking, right? Now that I'm in banking. This is actually, we can build up a little bit on this topic for you guys in terms of, you guys decided to build a company. Why and not pursue something else like consulting, or for you, Sam, as well, stay even in venture capital, right? I mean, why build a new company? I mean, instead of pursuing something else.
I'll let them answer. I think my answer's probably already come through, because I've dabbled in all those areas. But
I think for us, it was when we started the company, it was at a time when trying to identify targets specifically of T-cell receptors. So compared to antibodies, T-cell receptors recognize short fragments of peptides presented on the surface of cells and tumor cells. And due to the diversity of this space, it's really, really hard to find what T-cell receptors recognize. And at the time, there were really no platforms to do this in an unbiased manner. So if you think about what are the most prevalent and things that we didn't think were targetable and druggable at the time, we said, this is the platform that can do it, and we think there's a lot of, given the number of targets that are likely out there for T-cell receptors in particular, and only a little over a dozen are currently being targeted, there has to be a lot more. And, we made our first deck, and we said maybe there's an appetite for this, and we were really lucky that we were able to raise our seed round quickly and kind of just get going. I think once you start in this mindset of like, okay, there's this problem and there's a need, and I think we have a critical technology and the team to solve it, it just goes from there. And if that's your passion, it really does show through, I think.
I think for us, we realized that we had a very different perspective on biology, generally, from all of our backgrounds, and that there was this huge blind spot that people really only think about diseases in humans and a handful of model species, which are usually actually pretty bad models for human disease. And nobody was really doing anything about it, and we kind of went down the platform, people can use this as a service kind of thing. And same thing, it's like, if there's going to be value in this platform, why are you not doing it? And really just getting frustrated of the only metric in academia that mattered was the grants that you got and the papers that you got. Although we do have a government grant as well, and it's just a pain in the ass to write them as a business as it is as an academic. But you want to see your work actually make a difference, and we realized that we were probably the only set of people that were really set up to do that in our field. We'd each had 10 years plus of experience in our each domains, and we each highly respected each other for their very different but deep expertise. And so we just felt like we were the ones that could do it. So we did. Working on it.
Doing it, yeah. No, I totally agree. I think that totally resonates with me. I think we felt the same way. It was like we were in this really niche area, and we were like, there are a few other people in the world thinking about kind of the same problems we were, and we felt like really well positioned to. We're like, we could do this. Why not? Let's do it. When in Silicon Valley, right? And I think on the personal side, for me, like I mentioned earlier, I kind of always thought I'd go into industry, but in like a big company, doing drug development, drug discovery. And one thing I noticed about myself since I was a kid, but didn't really see it until I was in grad school, is that I love starting things and I hate finishing things. So I would just start all these projects, and it was the idea phase and the starting that was so exciting to me. And it was I just wanted to get it off the ground, design the experiment, design the study, and then about halfway through, I'd be like, okay, I'm kind of seeing the results. I'm ready to move on to the next thing, but I had to finish the experiment, write the paper, and I just wanted to start the next thing. And so I think that kind of attitude or personality type, I didn't really realize, but I think now looking back, meant that really actually drew me to the startup kind of environment, and getting to really start something from scratch and see all the different aspects of it is just so cool. I think it can be, in a lot of other opportunities, you kind of are very focused, single channel, and in a startup, especially starting it yourself, you really get exposure to everything. I mean, from buying equipment on auction to figuring out how to make people take your biohazard trash away to pitching to VCs. You kind of see it all, which is a really, really awesome learning opportunity. And like Maria said, it's like scientists tend to love to learn and learn well. And I think starting a startup is a pretty incredible learning opportunity. So
definitely learn something new every day. So for me also, I knew that I didn't really want to stay in academia. The incentive structure just kind of seemed broken, and just looking around, it was just, I didn't see myself going down that road. And then because it was, again, Canada, so this wasn't really a thing people talked about. So I was looking at all the different careers. There was a bunch of career sessions that were happening, and every time I'd go to one and I'd hear about management consulting or BD, and they all sounded something I could do, but not something I really wanted to do. So it was more like if I had to, I could possibly, but it wasn't really a passion. And I was going into taking some IP courses on the side, and kind of there's a Mars 101 program in Canada, which is kind of entrepreneurship, but really early. And that got me into thinking of what if we actually do this as a project on the side, not as a super postdoc, not as a fellowship application, but as an actual company. And that's where that idea got seeded. But yeah, and there's also the other thing of golden handcuffs. As somebody mentioned, is where you have a real job, let's say, that pays you real money, and then for you to leave that and do a startup is such a risk that I don't think I could have ever taken that. So it was one of those things that if I don't do it now, while I'm still relatively young and independent, and I can move to a different country, and and my parents are still young enough, so they'll be fine. So it was one of those things that the stars aligned. I feel like if I were in a real position, it would have been much harder for me to take that step unless I had a really good savings account, which probably not in the Bay Area.
now that you guys have, I mean, going back when you started your company, you got the co-founders, you licensed the IP, how was that fundraising process for you? When did you started looking for VCs? Like, I mean, even for me, the word VC, I mean, I just didn't exist until, I ran into an event and somebody, oh, are you a VC? And I was like, what is a VC? And so how was the process and when do you start it? I know that, you, Maria, you're in an incubator as well. Ashley, you're in H1. That's very helpful, but the process of really pitching to investors and getting that money in.
So being an incubator definitely helped because there was a sense of credibility to it. Like somebody already vetted you out of like hundreds of applications, whatever it was, and thought that you were, somewhat legit. And then the fact that you can show progress through your actual being there, and the best people that do diligence on you are the ones that are running the incubator. They can actually see you work, so they kind of become your advocates after a while. And that really helped with at least validating you to external investors, especially if you're outside of the Bay Area and you have no presence here, not a fancy pedigree of Nobel laureate PIs on your CV. So it was helpful just to get a credibility of somebody already vouching for you. So the incubator was helpful for that. And they also were helpful at making introductions to VCs to start with, because just getting a foot in the door is hard. A lot of cold emails, I'm sure, get ignored. Nobody's got time to even check their inbox from people they know, let alone people they don't know. So it was definitely harder. And going to networking events was a big one. Having face-to-face, hearing VCs speaking on panels is very telling, how they behave. Because it is a long-term relationship with your VCs. So you really have to make sure you do your homework on them. If they do any bad behavior type of things, if they hide things in the term sheets, because you're not an expert yet at reading term sheets. And if you're going up against somebody that's kind of trying to get you, already a bad vibe. So the best community I found is other founders that would talk to each other and be helpful of, who was good to them, who wasn't, who to stay away from, who was just doing market research using your deck, which happens a lot. So you learn by talking to other people and then getting the connections to the VCs. Other founders are also really good for that. I think if an introduction comes from a fellow founder, I think that's pretty helpful as well.
So how many investors you had to speak until you got one check?
Oh
tiny
my
check,
gosh.
like 300?
Yeah, during Bio we spoke to, I think about 100, maybe more. It was
Not that bad.
it was maybe more. It was a blur. Now we're doing it in a lot more of a, these few people don't have something conflicting in their portfolio. They're interested in platforms. They like therapeutics. We should talk to them. It also helps having already investors on board. So we had 4 investors in our seed round, and they've all been helpful at making intros to Series A investors. So that helped. But the 100 VCs that we spoke with early, they were just all sorts. I mean, it got to a point where if you have to teach them about DNA repair, they're probably not the right investor for you. So that became our threshold. Are you familiar with at least the science? And we can move on from there.
Although I will say we had an investor who I really did have to really explain what DNA was, and had ended up coming in the seed round and has been amazingly helpful, but not for the science.
Exactly.
But for lots of other things. So
For sure.
I will say that. I'll just make one comment about the investor thing. I think talking to other and doing diligence on the VCs is as important as doing them what they're doing on you. So reaching out to other companies, making friends with founders. I have Slack groups with other founders that we just shoot out, all the time. And really, because you really, you're going to see them or talk to them on the phone or have board meetings every month or 2 months for years. So you really don't want to work with assholes, what it comes down to. So you really need to feel like you can work with the people who are going to try to give you money. We talk with about 50 firms from our network at Age One and other people, and we got basically 5 of those end up coming in, so about 10% or so. So it wasn't that bad in hindsight. But it was a learning curve, and now I have relationships with a lot of investors, even if they didn't come in our seed round, that we're following up with and kind of building relationships. And it helps a lot as you build toward a Series A. We plan on doing this, and then you come back in a few months, and we did this. Here's the results of this. Here's what we're thinking about now. We thought we were going to do a pharma partnership. We did it on schedule, right? They can see that you're not BSing them. You're actually executing on what you say you're going to do. So that helps a lot. Yeah.
Anybody? Sam, for you or your experience?
Yeah, so quite a bit different, although I've been on the other side of that. And so it's been interesting to see kind of my experience. So my approach was, I guess I've been talking to investors the last 10 years. I've worked for them. I've partnered with them. I've had them on my board of the last company. So really that's kind of what you learn is you're always pitching, selling. For me, it was myself and the team. And so our strategy actually was to basically handpick the people we wanted to work with. And then our conversion rate was almost 100%, but there had been years that had gone into that. And we thought about, okay, who do we want on the extended team? Because really your investors become part of your team, especially those that join your board or even are observers on your board, because at the end of the day, in this industry with the amount of money you need to run a company, you're going to be giving up the majority of control really fast. And so picking them early and making sure that it's more than just money, there's strategic value. Like, we did not take the best term sheet, right? We took the term sheet that came with the people and the group of people that we wanted. And so that was kind of our approach to fundraising.
I totally agree with that. I think what everybody's been saying about doing diligence on your investors and making sure you're bringing in the people that are going to really help you, because you are going to be working really closely with them, especially in the beginning. And so we kind of had a very similar experience to Sam, where we thought really carefully about who we wanted to get in touch with and who we were hoping to raise from, and kind of tried to be very targeted. And we took a little bit of a different early strategy, which I mentioned, I think in my intro. We got super fortunate that we had friends and family that wanted to invest in us. And so we wanted to kind of take a little bit of a slow start so that we could really prove out the platform on our own, still maintaining control and keeping the direction of the company the way we wanted it to go. So we kind of bootstrapped a lot, as much as we could, went super cheap, didn't take salaries for a good chunk of time. We were in a fortunate position where we could do that, and then got a grant and kind of tried to really get the story really solid before reaching out to those investors that we really wanted to raise from. And I think that really helped to streamline the seed round, and then further the Series A. Then our seed investors were incredibly valuable, and during our seed stage for kind of connections to advisors, giving us advice during board meetings and outside of board meetings, and then connecting us with Series A firms to talk to about the Series A. And it was really great that we could bring in such great seed investors. So
Yeah, I think the only thing I'll add is people have mentioned that your board and your investors are your really long-term partners. So early on, those people that are going to help you scale or help you get from your academic or kind of your baseline idea to the place where you want to go, you want to make sure that you guys are both aligned in that, in the future of the company. And I think one thing that we got really, really lucky with is people really believed in the starting team and the platform, and allowed us to build it out the way we envisioned, and really worked with them to do that properly. So I think that that's something that really, it's sometimes tempting to take the first term sheet or the best term sheet that you get, but really to make sure that you're aligned with your investors on where you see the company going, and kind of running through different scenarios has been really valuable for us.
Do any of you have any horror stories? Or would you like to share? Can you want to?
We had one during our seed where we got a term sheet on Friday, I think at noon, and they said we had to decide by 5 p.m. And we're like, I'm sorry, this is we can't do this. It was really tricky. So that was an interesting to navigate. We were like on the phone calling all our advisors. What do we do? So that was kind of funny.
So recently I had a founder that she received a term sheet from a well-known investor who has this reputation of not being that friendly and nice, and the terms were terrible. So she said no, and was very quiet. They got back to her with the terms that she wanted. So sometimes saying no to your investor, it depends on who you're talking to, right? It's helpful. So that was a very interesting one, because I was like, wow, you told this guy no? Nobody says no to him. That was very good for her. But she got the really good terms now. So yeah, awesome. So what's next for you guys in terms of the company? Are you looking for funding, looking to hire people, grow the team, maybe spin out another company out of the company? I had a couple of those ones. So what's next for you?
So we are now starting to fundraise for a Series A. So we're having soft discussions. So I know a lot of people get the advice of always be fundraising, and we definitely didn't take that. So once we raise, we're like, okay, cool, now we get to do the work. It's just exhausting and distracting if you're always out pitching. And also, if you're not ready to take money, why would you take the dilution if you don't need it? So we were very methodical about, okay, now we get to do the work. And then now that the work is kind of done, and thinking in terms of milestones is very helpful. Like this money went into de-risking the platform. It went into de-risking the lead asset. And now for the next round, we're taking this asset into the clinic. We are taking a few other programs from the platform into IND-enabling studies and budgeting for each of those. I see a lot of companies over-raising. Raising is easier now, is what some people say. So take more money while you can because there's always a downturn coming. But in reality, I don't think, as long as you're building something people need, people will fund it. And it is about losing control because in our next round, we definitely will lose control. And it's a matter of who do you lose control to? Are they aligned with your vision? Are they going to support your platform play? Or are they just going to turn you into a single asset spin out and sell you to somebody in 3 years because that's their timelines for exit? So you need to be really aware of these types of things. We're also hiring. We moved into a bigger lab space, which was great. So that actually enabled us. We were, after IndieBio went to MBC Biolabs, J-Labs. So it was another incubator. Which was pretty tight after a while. We got to 6 people there and we couldn't get any physical space anymore. So then we moved into our own space now, which is much better. So we are starting to expand the hiring, getting some more senior folks involved. So for now, we've been only using advisors. Just, the nice network that we have here in the Bay Area, people are just really lovely about giving up their time to help us. So we didn't feel like we needed that kind of senior executive level help internally. But now it's getting to a point where with the drug development coming to where it is, it would be nice to have somebody who's done it before being a bit more involved on a day-to-day. So we are looking for that level as well.
Have you pass it down? Yeah, totally. We're in a similar spot with growth, although just now post-Series A, having closed a couple weeks ago. And yeah, I think totally in a similar spot where now we're realizing we've kind of gotten things. We've learned a lot, but it's time to be bringing in a lot of that expertise in-house as we're really pushing to move into the clinic with our lead program. So kind of what's next for us is building out a clinical team and figuring out how to file an IND and bringing in that kind of clinical expertise. Also, while maintaining growth of the platform and starting to really build up our second and third programs because we don't want trouble in the clinic to totally set us back when we're ready to do our next raise. So trying to cover all the bases, as usual in startup land, doing everything all at once. So growing the clinical side and growing the R&D team as well. And yeah, I think the next 2.5 years will be a lot of growth and trying to scale, growing faster than we have. We took, as I mentioned, kind of a slow and steady approach with over 4 years getting to about 13 people, and we're going to be, more than doubling that in a much shorter amount of time. So figuring out those challenges, I think that's really what's up next for us.
I think we're still a little bit in the slow and steady phase. We've been very thoughtful about the positions that we hire for the things that we really need and trying to make sure that each of those positions leads to a key milestone. So we're building towards some in vivo proof of concept for our lead targets right now, which came directly out of our platform. We have a set of compounds that we are repurposing, and we also have a set of novel genetic targets that we're working on validating. And that's really, in the conversations I'm having with investors, which we are not fundraising right now, is really building, a lot of data points around what they would like to see from a company such as us, and the consensus statement, and kind of building toward that. And so we've been getting a lot of very consistent feedback, which is awesome. And so really just focused on that, because again, as a platform therapeutics company, you have to show progress on your lead candidate. And so that's really what we're doing. We're hiring one position right now for the wet lab. That's really focused on dealing with tissues from the biobank and sort of building up the reserve of the next set of targets. And then I think after we raise a Series A, then we'll be in the same place of getting in some more senior leadership, the proper drug discovery experience. Yeah.
So pass it down. So we're currently raising our A. We have been able to build out the team, a really solid core team, both validating our platform and getting our first lead compounds, kind of validating those as well. So both building out of always the R&D side, but we've also recently gone more into like the program development stage as well. So building out that team, pitch engineering as well. So it's exciting times.
We are also going to be fundraising this year. And yeah, again, more money, more problems really. But we will be advancing our lead programs kind of toward the clinic, but also thinking about going a bit beyond that. We think we see a really big inflection kind of even in the phase 1A studies in oncology. It's one nice thing about oncology is you get an early read in efficacy if you can go into selected patient populations. And so I think the tension for us will be how much do we really need to do that and be realistic, because while you don't want to raise more money than you need, you often need more money than you think. And that's, again, having seen that and knowing what it takes really to kind of get there, we want to be mindful of that. And you don't want to hamstring yourselves with respect to doing the right experiments and you basically covering for risks, right? Because things happen, right? You go into these tox studies, weird things happen, and if you're believing your target and your approach, it's often the next thing that comes through that's going to be the winner. So really thinking about that. On the organizational front, we have decided to move to Boulder, Colorado. So that's an interesting decision for us. It's really a talent-based decision, but it's also a cultural decision. So having recruited 60 PhD scientists over the last 3 years in the Bay Area, and having seen what it takes to kind of live comfortably here, it's hard, right? And so, if we're going to differentiate on team, I think that team also needs to be fulfilled and happy. And so there's great talent, and we're also hoping that, PhD scientists working at the bench can buy houses and have families and live comfortably because they deserve to. And if you show up to work stressed every day, it's not a good thing, right? And having been a high-level manager dealing with that and really empathizing, it was a decision we made. In some respect, it's a risk, but I think it's a bet that so we are hiring. We're hiring kind of cancer biology, all levels. We're going to be building out a core biology lab first because we're able to really leverage external CROs for a lot of the other stuff in the small molecule realm. That's one nice thing is we can have big teams abroad that are helping us, but core biology will be in-house.
Congrats for the move. I think it's very interesting and good luck for. So, and I would like to thank our panelists for making the time and sharing their experiences. Does anybody in the audience has a question? Are we sharing the microphone? My microphone. I don't want to, because I'm a little bit sick, so I don't want to share this.
There was a brief comment about a CSO advisor, but actually no other mention of advisors during the. I was hoping to hear a bit more. Yes, co-founding grad students or ex-colleagues and whatnot, but advisors. We're early stage startup as well, so we believe that's a huge thing. Before the seed round or anything? What's your take on it? What point of time do you reach out to them if they are not your PhD advisors or postdoc advisors? And what role do they play? In the sense, senior most people, they come in, do they take up, how much time are they ready to devote in your idea and whatnot? Is it very part-time, couple of hours a week? How much are they ready to pitch in? And how should we approach them, reach out to them, what to expect of them? It's all on the advisors. Yeah. Thanks.
Okay, so I can start. So we had, so we were really fortunate that, so our PhD advisor had started companies before, so he was able to provide a lot of advice and support, but wasn't actually operational at all. I mean, he's a co-founder and is a part of the SAB. I think the most important thing is making sure that you can build that relationship. So I think the hard part always is meeting the people that are going to provide that value and actually have a relationship with them, because you don't want to be in a position where you just kind of email like, hey, you are experienced in this field, can you advise me on this? And sometimes that does work, but I think for us, so we were able to meet some industry advisors early on that helped us with both business model, making introductions to investors and other people that could help. So I do think that, especially coming from relatively little experience, at least from the startup and industry world, that was very helpful for us. And I think finding advisors that you trust and you have a good relationship with is key. I think everyone is different as to how you find those people, but making, whether it's going to networking events or meetings or within your own professional network, it was really important for us early on.
Comment too. I mean, initially, a lot of our advisors were our former academic mentors, but the utility of them was fairly short-lived, right? So very quickly within the accelerator, we got introduced to one of our key advisors now is Tom Hughes, who used to lead global cardiovascular and metabolism at Novartis, who's been super helpful. And he introduced us to a lot of other people who have done portfolio strategy, medicinal chemists. And so your needs change as you go. And so, we've taken the approach of reaching out to advisors when we need them. We've had one formal SAB meeting, which was not super helpful, to be honest. It's more about emailing the people who are on your side and getting the advice that you need. So I think it's being flexible about, this is going to be my SAB and that's who they're going to be. Your needs will constantly change. And so being open to bringing on new advisors and slowly devaluing ones that just are more purely academic, and you really need somebody who's done BD and partnering and drug development. So that will change over time.
I'll say too, it's a great question. I think the advisors were super critical for us from the beginning. At first we were, I'll say network, like really just lean in your PhD and postdoc advisors, their colleagues, your committee, if you're a PhD student, anyone in the academic community or outside also that you're connected with, ask around. Often there will be someone who's leaving their job or, moving to another company and will have some time to devote to advisorship. We had a really, really helpful advisor early on that we met through my PhD advisor, who, we only met lighter than part-time. It was like, sparingly, but we really made use of the working sessions that we had and, traded equity for time. And it was really, really helpful to pull in the expertise on the business side that we didn't have. One other resource that's really great is there's this executive mentorship program I think it's through QB3, and it's basically this program that'll match you up with an advisor in industry to kind of for equity. And it can be either sort of a courtship process to potentially bring them on full-time later or just mentorship of the founding team. So that can be another good way, but otherwise just sourcing your network and trying to get connections. And then once you get investors, they're really awesome for
Network. Keep your LinkedIn profile up to date, right? People that I've just Googled on LinkedIn, what I need, and I'd be surprised how many second connections I have from people I know from Stanford or other places I've been that you can reach out to get you an intro, right? So just pushing that network as hard as you can.
So it really depends what you want from the advisors. Do you want an employee or do you want somebody to every once a month tell you what you're doing makes sense? So for us, our only official SAB member was actually Charlie, my co-founder. He found him on LinkedIn and he was perfect for what we needed at the time. He was like an orphan disease, big company. Reached out to him on LinkedIn. The guy was super busy. He was going through his own work things. And then eventually we just started sending him data. And then the data was what got him interested. But obviously it's a two-way relationship, right? Like they have to get something from this as well. Everyone's generous with their time to an extent, but if they feel like they can't help you with anything, they just won't really engage. So make sure that you're, you understand where they're coming from and you don't abuse their time. So with him, we meet once a month when we really need him, very ad hoc. And then we have a lot of other advisors that are unofficial that we didn't actually give equity to. They're just really nice people that are interested in what we're working on. And they check in every now and then. They proactively check in, which is really nice when we get too busy and bogged down in the details to look up. So yeah, the Bay Area is great for that. There's also a California Life Science Institute, which is a really nice program that matches startups up with advisors in their space, which I think you guys also went through. And it was quite helpful.
Thanks a lot. It's been great to hear about your experiences and insights. I'm a PhD student at Berkeley, and I'm wondering how far along was your tech before you decided to start a company?
Non-existent. But the idea was validated. We knew that people wanted it, and we knew how to build it. It was just not built.
The That's a great question. We had, I'd say currently the current iteration of our platform is sort of a three-pronged platform. We had one arm pretty fully fleshed out and validated. The publication was, I think, in review maybe when we decided to co-found, and then another arm was still in the project phase, but it was becoming clear that it was going to be really pivotal to the platform. And then a third arm was not even developed. It was completely conceptual, and we did it totally at the company. So I think it was like we kind of had a range of how far along it was. But we had a really clear idea of how it was going to work and how we were going to get there. So
Not purely a technology platform, but I mean, our CSO had finished up really the bulk of a grant she was funded with at Stanford that was really doing the genomics of the model that we work with now. And then we went into the accelerator and did the first really deep transcriptomics and attack-seq, and that's really what's driving the bulk of the discovery platform now. So that was actually developed within the company.
So ours is pretty far along. We did most of the proof of concept during our PhD, which I think lended us to being able to raise a fairly large seed round, which allowed us to be very flexible with space and how we develop things. So I think it really depends on what you want out of your seed round. I think staying in academia, if you have a little bit of a technology, like it is such an amazing resource to be at Berkeley, where there are all these core facilities and expertise, and you can get as much, advice or what have you as you want. You can go to things like this, and I think that once you make that decision to incorporate spin out, you have to be very it's critical when you make that decision to go out on your own, and I think it's not something that a lot of people people don't take it lightly when you're moving forward.
It's not applicable to me.
So on the biz dev side, I was wondering, how big of a priority is brand development for early biotech startups, and are investors looking at a way you differentiate yourself from your competitors in brand development, because the technology might be similar to other people up and down the peninsula or wherever? So how is building that out and then attracting new talent through more of a branding aspect? Yeah, is marketing important at that sort of early stage, because you see a lot of bigger companies more in tune with the marketing, videos, things like that. So I was just wondering.
I think for us it was relatively unimportant, but that's just our perspective. I think that at least for making a big brand name for ourselves, I think we wanted to really prove out our at least starting out. Now I think when you're getting bigger and you're trying to grow, then it's really important to make sure that people know about your science and your mission. But when you're first starting out, I mean, the focus is really on your milestones, on your goals, on your science, how you can build that team, and really recruiting that team to make it happen. And that's the priority when you're really first starting out.
Yeah, I would agree to that. I think for us, because we were relatively unknown in the space, it was more about just validating who we were as scientists, but also people that had a therapeutics focus, and we're really building a company. This is not a science project, and so pushing on that. More than, we have a cool logo, if I do say so myself, but otherwise, thanks, appreciate that. But the website we put up on day 3 of the incubator was the same until we changed it right before we announced our partnership. We're like, oh, we should probably update the website. But we just sort of left it, right, because we just really needed to execute on milestones, yeah.
Yeah, I would say we, sort of similar vein, I think it's really interesting to think about branding. There definitely are startups I've seen out there at a seed stage, a pre-seed stage, that are really cognizant of that. We, having no expertise on PR or branding, we're a little nervous to do anything that we might regret later. So we took a very stealth approach, waited until really we had something big we wanted to announce, and now we're starting to think more about, now that we're at the A stage and we're going to be growing and recruiting and needing to get our name out there, definitely starting to think more about that. But early on, we kind of kept it quiet, focused really on the technology ourselves.
I think it's also really different based on what kind of company you are. If you're consumer facing, yes, it really matters. If you're selling anything to anyone, it really matters. If you're a therapeutics drug discovery play, nobody really cares. You should be Googleable, you should be legit. Employees should be able to find you, investors should be able to find you, advisors. But it's not about really looking pretty. Like, we just got these jackets for Christmas this year, mostly because I needed a jacket. But it's really at the end. Like, IndieBio tried to get us to like tweet more and get accounts made. So we made the accounts, and then we just got really who cares, right? Like, here's my tube. It kind of fades. I have seen a lot of companies that use Twitter well. I've seen people that use it poorly, and that comes back to bite them. So once it's out there, it's out there. So yeah, if you don't really need it, I would avoid it. It's a bit of a distraction.
Hi, thanks for the great panel, really interesting stuff. My question is specifically relating to fundraising. So we are a small biotech in Carlsbad in Southern California, and we're getting to the point of trying to do starting to do a Series A. So it's a sort of a multi-part question. The first is, what do you think about cold versus warm intros when it comes to VCs? Second part to it is, do you have a typical type of strategy when it comes to getting intros with specific type of investors? And maybe if you could just talk a little bit about how exactly you were planning to go about doing that and what you've seen that works really well for raising Series A, finding a lead investor, et cetera, et cetera. Thank you.
Sometimes cold intros work, rarely, from what I've seen. Warm intros are definitely better if you find somebody that can vouch for you, that knows the VC. That's easier to get in. Also, meeting the VCs themselves at networking events or at panels and actually striking a human connection often helps. I think being in SoCal is a little harder because there's not as much of a community there. But the Bay Area is ripe for that, which is I think why most of us are here, even though a lot of us are from here. So that's kind of the beauty of why people are, here going to events and networking. A lot of it is you choosing the VC as well and not just blasting, thousands of emails, but actually going, this is something that we learned along the process, is who is into what, because that's not something you know a priori. A lot of VCs don't actually post who's in their portfolios. So it takes a lot of research to figure out who is interested in what kind of science and if they have the money for it, if they just raised a fund, if they're at the end of their life cycle, there's no point. I mean, it's always good to like make friends and learn who's where, but it's a matter of respecting their time and yours after a while.
Great. I want to thank you guys for speaking to us today. I think it's really nice to see a bunch of young co-founders out here presenting to the community. And one of the challenges that a young co-founder often faces is, how do you generate a sense of credibility, that you know what you're doing and that you're going to be able to make wise decisions. And so I'm also going to challenge you, Sam, to answer this question in particular, because especially for those of us without a PhD, oftentimes all you have is industry experience or something. And so without publications, how do you build that credibility?
I would say industry experience is more than a PhD, 100%. For us, you get credibility by actually doing the thing that you wanted to do. It's just executing. Nothing else will get it for you. No amount of like star-studded SAB that helps. But it's about you actually getting it done as a young person. I think a lot of times we'd walk into a room with pharma, partners, and they would look at us and, wonder if we're there to take notes. And it's an uphill battle, but then you start talking and you actually sound like you know what you're doing and you know what you're talking about, and that's really builds credibility that way.
I want to get this down to Sam, but really quick, I'll say I think for us it was learning how to really speak the pharma language. So I think the science can speak for itself, and when you're really an expert in what you're doing, the credibility on the science becomes obvious pretty quick. But learning the lingo, learning how to really focus on what matters, depending on who you're talking to, whether it's a pharma partner or a VC, and kind of showing the understanding that you can get from talking to other founders, talking to advisors, kind of making it clear the credibility, even if it's not on paper yet, through showing what you know and showing that you're thinking strategically about the right things was really helpful for us.
Yeah, I think we had an advantage because, all of us had about a decade of experience in each of our fields, and we did have publications, but then same thing, I'm a clinician also, although I'm not a human clinician, and so I can talk to people in pharma about human indications and have an understanding of the biology and what it means, what pharmacology is, and, so I think you leverage your background and then execute. I agree with that. Yeah.
I agree with all of them, but I'll get this to Sam.
Yeah, it's a tough one to answer, right? And it kind of it strikes a little bit of this, insecurity I've had for years, which I think is a good thing, right? To kind of acknowledge and think about. For scientific founders, I do think that, especially in the investment community, and having played a part of that and seen a lot, I mean, the beauty of what we do is that data often speaks for itself, right? And so if you've been a big part of that and it can show that process and defend the science, you get it, right? And I think a lot of the investors, they go into this because they're a big inflection in just validating that science, right? And then the translation comes, and the economics change, and there's lots of value for everybody. But my particular case, especially given the company that I co-founded, it was a team-based, and as a not only co-founder but somebody that's going to be a CEO of what could be a public-facing company in for like Black Diamond Therapeutics in 2 years from now. I don't know if you guys know that story. Before they dose their first patient, they're trading at 1.3 billion. It just listed, and so anyway, they're a perfect comp for us. But no, but it's yeah. Oh, so our valuation just went up tenfold. No, I'm kidding. But no, I think for me in industry, especially as somebody without a PhD, it's all those steps along the way where you're asking yourself that question: do I really have any business being in this role? And for me, I think it's been that progression over the last 10 plus years in the experience and the breadth of experience from doing science and from managing teams and managing projects to doing investments. Certainly business school helped with that, and that's a different sort of credibility that gets you access. But at the end of the day, it's like when you guys show up in lab or go to work, and it's execution and it's performance, and I think you have to have the confidence to have the opportunity, and it's this fine balance between confidence and ego, because I think you always want to be grateful for that opportunity, and then you got to prove yourself. And I think what actually started happening to me is I started getting opportunities that, frankly, I did not know I could do, right? And I was worried. There's a risk, too, taking on too much and failing. And so I think it's along the way. It's just developing that network of mentors and advisors you can lean on, and always just being honest, right, about what you know and what you don't know. And if you can get really good at knowing what you don't know, people are always there to help, right? And then in being able to find the help, you establish yourself as a leader. And so I think it's that leadership progression, taking on bigger, increasing roles over a short amount of time, and then accomplishing and executing in those roles that, I think is what earned me the opportunity to do this. But it's something that, I still, I feel like I have a lot to prove, right? And I think it's on me and the team and the people we surround ourselves with that enable that success.
Hello. Thank you so much for the panel. It's been awesome. My question is about patenting your IP. And at what point you did that or filed a provisional or non-provisional with relation to fundraising and talking to VCs, and or when you licensed IP from a university or someone else?
I'll start because it's quick. When we don't have a platform, so our IP strategy is going to be on the therapeutic, on the drug. And I think there's actually a risk of filing your IP too early. So we'll end up raising, many tens of millions of dollars before we file our first patent. And we'll have provisional patent applications ready, and we'll be monitoring the situation. But you don't want to do it too soon. And for multiple reasons, you don't want to prior art yourself, which happens a lot. And then also, it's a long path to get to the market. And so if you're going to be a billion-dollar drug, if you patent too early and you lose a year of billion-dollar sales, that's a lot of money. And so you got to think kind of through those aspects of it. But that comes out of the platforms. You can patent kind of the drug, what will be the drug product, and that's a totally different strategy. So I'll let you guys speak to the technology.
Yeah, so currently our strategy is quite similar to what Sam just spoke to. A lot of the value creation comes from whatever you get out of the platform, not necessarily the platform itself. So whether that's the therapeutic, target, et cetera, and you have to make sure you're not filing too early and at the appropriate time with the right data package. And monitoring, something that I had to learn a lot of was like how these patents progress from provisional to et cetera. But we did have patents at Stanford that we had to license out. What's great about Stanford and I think a lot of the institutions in the Bay Area is that they go through this a lot. So you kind of know what to expect. They know what to expect. They know what's reasonable. And oftentimes there's an advisor who also knows what's reasonable. And oftentimes it's easy if the advisor or wherever the patent's originally coming from, they're supportive of the company. It's pretty straightforward. It's you know, there's a little bit of negotiation that goes back and forth, but at the end of the day, like they want you are the best person or company to fulfill the potential of this IP, and they believe in that. And if you don't license it, maybe no one else will.
Very briefly, yeah, the value of what we're going to be doing is going to be mostly in the therapeutics. So we're in the process of sort of slowly putting together provisional around the parts of the platform, just in case somebody else decides to build a crazy comparative biology-based platform. But more is sort of on advice of one of our lead investors. And we honestly hedged a lot about whether it's even worth doing it on the platform versus just the therapeutics. But we are going to file it, but we're not spending a ton of time and effort. We're repurposing a lot of stuff from grants and just not making it a big focused effort, but focus on the therapeutics.
Yeah, so we took a little bit of a different approach because our platform is kind of the entire strategy for making our drugs as opposed to like a discovery platform. So we were really focused on early IP generation during still the academic phase when basically we were ready to publish or ready to talk publicly. We filed the provisional right away for every arm of our engineering platform. And then we've taken a pretty I don't know if I call it aggressive, but a pretty forward approach with filing as we continue to develop the platform because we really wanted to have a robust kind of claim on the engineered colonizing bacteria as therapeutics. So kind of trying to stake out space in the strategy, and then I think it'll almost be a little bit opposite for us in terms of then when we have that, the actual drug candidate itself is a little bit less of a, I mean, it'll get its own protection, but it's really around if we patent all the ways to make the kind of drugs we're making, no one else can do it. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's definitely, patents are defensive. They're not like a scientific paper. You're not putting it out there for people to really understand what you're doing. It's more of a, could somebody else patent something similar and block me from doing my own thing, which is the worst feeling, especially if you're out there talking about it and pitching it. So that's the paranoia about patenting a platform. So we had really broad patents around the platform with essentially, we're not really hoping to get much out of them other than just having them out there. And a lot of the operational side is the trade secrets around the platform is what we're keeping in-house. For the assets, it's always a trick of like when do you actually patent an asset? And we would like for it to be further along, but at the same time, we're having manufacturing done offsite. And a lot of people, there's a lot of paranoia, and it's good to have at least a few patents going on that family class and just constantly evergreen them and hope for formulation patents being really important at the end. Yeah, so there's a lot of strategies around that. If you are licensing something out of the university, you can talk to the transfer folks there. They probably know a lot and can help you and guide you in what's the right decision. If you are part of a university, I would definitely rely on them.
Hi, I'm Michael Mengel. Thank you for your talk. I come from, so I'm French-German, and I studied most of my time in Germany. I have a Master of Chemistry. And I came here to do an internship and learn about entrepreneurship and innovation, and I work actually in the incubator here of Bayer. And I'm doing this IP portfolio management actually for the startups we have here. But my question, actually I have two questions. My first is, what are the other options to build a company other than kind of this, from the PhD, you got an invention, you're doing it. Are there other ways than that? And my second question was, is there any list, like angel list, right? Like where you can connect with entrepreneurs. Angel list is more tech oriented. Is there something similar for biotechnologies, biotech companies? So, yeah, thank you.
BCBA.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, I don't think there's anything official that I know of.
Yeah,
I can't really think of a good like middle ground.
There's Bay Area groups. I think I'm part of this chat that I see is like 400 people. What is it called? Is anybody? It's the Bay Area for people from the industry.
Like a meetup group?
Yeah, it's an app. I forgot the name. See, I mean, you can tell that I'm not that technical that I don't even know that. Somebody at me. But to answer your first question about, going through your PhD, I think it's mostly about, you know, looking at a problem that you see, right? Not necessarily needs to be in life science. I mean, can be in text. Just looking at a problem and trying to find the solution for it, right? And building the team around. I mean, something that it's exciting to you than finding the right team members that can work on that. And I would love to hear your guys' perspectives, but.
Just maybe, I thought the question was, are there other ways to start a company aside from kind of spinning out technology?
Oh, okay. I heard something else besides that.
So,
Um,
go ahead. You guys all
Go ahead, Sam.
Okay, so yeah, there are lots. I mean, you do it around a team, right? So you can get an experienced team together and say, hey, give us some runway, and we're going to kind of create something, and that's a strategy that's been done. There are also, if you kind of identify opportunities that you think are maybe being overlooked, but that could be served or met by existing assets, you can license drugs and build a team around pursuing them for specific patient indications or new applications. There's a lot of that, actually. I think there's probably more of that than even just platform academic spin-outs. So certainly, if you can find kind of unaddressed unmet needs that can be addressed with existing solutions, that's a good strategy as well.
Yeah, I will say, I think one of the reasons academic spin-outs or team-oriented spin-outs are so common is because oftentimes it's required that you have some sort of proof of concept or some sort of technology and biology. We've talked about this a lot. It's very capital intensive, and it's hard to get access to, like, I don't know if there are so many like maker spaces for biology or drug development in general. And I think, Sam has really great experience. He was able to meet a lot of really experienced people and get that experience where you can build some sort of team like that. But when you're, I think most of us are, when you're a young founder, it's hard to have that network. So I think it makes a lot of sense to be in like the kind of academic hubs where there's a lot of innovation. And I think that's why it's pretty common, at least for young founders.
I mean, the other big way that these companies get started is there are big venture capital funds that start biotechs, right? I mean, that's sort of more of an East Coast ethos, not necessarily East Coast, West Coast, but more traditional life science biotech funds. A lot of them create companies. So there's a company creation arm within biotech. The West Coast tends to be smaller rounds, founder-friendly, but that's another big thing that we haven't mentioned is that's another way that companies get started is by venture companies.
Yeah, totally. The venture creation model. Yeah, that's definitely quite prevalent on the East Coast and somewhat here too. I like what Barbara said about if you see a problem, and think of a way to solve it, it definitely doesn't have to be related to what you're working on now. If you're at a company or in your PhD or postdoc, since starting Novome, it's like, I feel like I'm seeing companies like everywhere in the cloud. You're just like, that's a problem that could be solved, and I think it can be totally unrelated to what you're working on, but I have a friend who was just talking about an interesting way she's planning to generate capital, which is she has a cool idea and she just wants to like do some quick science in her garage and write a patent and then sell it to fund this other company that she wants to start. So I was like, that's a cool idea I'd never heard of. Just write a patent to start a company and that's not based on the patent. I thought that was a cool idea. So.
Yeah, I think articulating a solution to a problem is definitely where you start. You make even a deck, because we were ideation stage, so just identifying, being able to articulate what a problem is. Why are you the one to actually address it? And what do you know that others haven't? Why do you really care about it? The thing about startups is nobody will ever care about what you're doing more than you. And that's something that I heard once and it super resonated. Like every now and then you're working on something and you're like, oh, if I don't get it done, nobody will. And it's very much that. And the same applies to the actual subject matter that you're working on. There's very few people in the world that actually are working in your space on a lot of things. There's a lot of companies that are also competing with each other and they're just trying to outfund their work, which is a whole other level of exhaustion. And I don't think that's that fun to do. But if it's an actual problem that you identify that you have the solution for, that's a good place to start. And yet the venture creation models, the entrepreneurship in residence, they have a lot of those EAR positions they could apply for. I think they typically prefer experienced people that have done a startup already. So there's a bit of a caveat there.
Thank you for a great panel. My name is Ofer. I'm an international postdoc from Israel. I'm also a co-founder of a company back home. And my question kind of spins out, what, if any, experience you had with raising partners outside of the U.S., venture capital outside of the U.S., if you feel as a Bay Area U.S. entrepreneurs in biotech that it harms your credibility for some reason, because as an international, as a foreign co-founder, for us, we found it extremely hard to, if we're not here physically, to raise money.
Yeah, I would totally agree. So we had to move from Canada for here to get that credibility. But having said that, we're not eligible for SBIRs. There's a lot of things that we kind of locked ourselves out of by being foreign, but that's what it is. Getting a visa, like all the work that goes on the back end. But being here is important. You can have an offsite in Israel and a presence here, like a corporate headquarters even for just BD. You don't have to have the labs here. A lot of companies have a BD presence here, and let's say their labs in Canada or wherever. There's also a lot of money coming in from Asia. There's a lot of Chinese VC money coming in, and they don't really care where you are as much as long as they can meet you here. So that's half of it.
I don't know this totally answers your question, but we had one investor in France that we were talking to as a specific microbiome-focused fund, and it seemed relatively smooth to have conversations with them other than the time difference. But it ended up just being not quite the right fit, and that was really the only reason, that we didn't kind of further conversations. But
just an afterthought. The other thing about the Bay Area VCs is if they're very different from Europe, I don't think they play nice together, because the Bay Area, just the numbers that you get here, the valuations, the amount of money you raise is very different than you would in Europe. So getting a syndicate that's across, I think, will be very difficult to do. We've talked to some European investors, and the amount of money they would give us, especially if we're based here, is not enough to even have like a 6-month runway. So yeah, so that's another thing to keep in mind. Building a syndicate will be difficult, unless it's a VC like Orbimed that's already got a presence there and here.
I'll make a quick comment on, because we do have a Taiwanese firm that came into our round, and we brought them on. They wanted to come in for more than we could let them come in for, but we still made room for them essentially because they are really only focused on healthcare, and our lead investor is more tech focused, and so bio was kind of a niche within their larger portfolio. And the Taiwanese firm had a board of MD PhDs, and one of their partners is a neuroscientist. Like, it just made a lot of sense, and they've been great. So we had to go through this FISUS paperwork and promise that we weren't going to do missile development or whatever. Like, I had to read through this disclaimer, right? But other than that, I mean, in the time change, and now one of them is here locally anyway, so it doesn't matter. But it was fine. It was dealable.
Yeah, so currently all of our investors are Bay Area or US based. I think we've talked about this a lot, is really the fit. Can you work with the investor? Do they believe in the company? Do they believe in the vision? That's the most important thing. I think you can always take money, but you want to take smart money. You want to take money that's really going to add value to your company, and yeah, you're all aligned.
No addition. Hello. So this question's for those of you who had a tough time raising your seed round, so not Sam. And I'm just curious if it was purely a numbers game for you and it was just getting sort of shots on goal, or was there something you changed about your strategy, changed about how you were pitching or how you were approaching people that sort of led to your success that you can remember?
I will say that similar to what you were saying, our first pitch decks were science presentations, which doesn't go down super well. But we were fortunate enough to be in an accelerator with a lead investor who sort of kept kicking us sort of burner intros. Like, there were people that were probably not going to invest in us, but they forced me to go out and pitch and get feedback and refine the deck and refine the deck and refine the deck and refine the deck. And it is a bit of a funnel. Like, you do have to talk to X number of people. If you don't have experience, you don't know the people, you're building the relationships, you have to meet X number of people that are then going to do the next layer, that are then going to do the next layer, and allow you to also have enough options that you can diligence them as well. So Yeah, a lot of refinement and a lot of, for us, take the fuzzy animals out of the deck was very good advice, which helped the investor conversations go farther. There's just listening to the feedback, right? We made a list of here are the comments that we always get. Let's make sure we address those, right? So we had a rolling list of questions that investors ask. Let's make sure we address those, right? So learning by iteration.
And for us, a lot of it was showing progress. So when you meet investors for the first time and you're like, here's what we're going to do. And then the next time it's like, oh, we did some of it. Then the next time it's like, oh, we actually did the whole thing and we discovered something new. So that kind of track. Don't be afraid to ping people multiple times, especially people that you like. So it's worth it. But it's definitely a funnel, yeah, and perfecting your deck from a science talk, 100%.
There is an art to emailing investors, and the multiple pinging, you can't look desperate, right? So anyway, there's an art. It's an art to that. And someone should teach you the art of that. No, nothing to come. Okay, I'm just gonna hold it then.
And one last question.
Hi, thank you very much for doing this. It was really valuable. So you guys have mentioned that there's value from the investors. I've heard they introduce you to advisors, for instance, or you have to make sure they're not, going to take advantage of you. What other kinds of value have you gotten from these kinds of investors? Because I'm just curious to see what else you can get.
Yeah, so I think, so introductions and kind of paving the way to new investors is incredible value, right? So that, and I think we've all kind of touched on that. Just one specific case for us, there was one investor that one of the partners had been head of development at BMS when BMS was developing the drug that we're trying to improve on, right? So it's great validation for us. It's like, okay, that's a big, if we can kind of convince this person so that there's value in kind of going through that. And speaking about refining the deck, I mean, it did help us hone our messaging and get there within that firm. But having that person now on the board, really valuable, right? Because we talk about a big thing is regulatory strategy, right? If we're going to take this to proof of concept and meet this inflection point, what's the right path? How do we think about it? What do we need to show early? And somebody that's lived that, okay, so that's huge value. The other huge value I think investors bring is recruiting, right? And it's a really useful tool. They have broad networks. These investors come with sort of a little bit, when you're a startup, it's super risky, right? When you get the right investors that have been there and they've shown that they've stayed with companies, it gives potential employees more confidence to join your company. It's also sort of that selection filter that kind of gives you credibility as a company, especially if they know the space and they've had successful exits. So I think recruiting and expanding your network is huge value.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with all of those points. One thing I would add is one part of our platform that I actually haven't touched on a lot is there's a pretty big tech or MLAI, whatever you want to call it, component to that, and we wanted to make sure that we had some of that experience as well as kind of like biotech experience as well. So really diversifying your board for the expertise that they can lend to you is super important, both from a recruiting perspective, but also from what tools are available out there that could help you scale faster. I think that they see a lot more. You can have a lot of tunnel vision, I think, when you're and you should when you're a co-founder, but they see a lot of things, and they can really expand your horizons in that way as well.
I'll say that not just the investor that you work with, but how good is their network, right? Like, so our lead investor is called True, which they're not purely biotech. They do a lot of tech, and they have a burgeoning biotech sector, but you get on these listservs with, founders who have taken companies public and who have done everything from consumer to whatever. And you can ping out questions on that, or they'll ping out questions, or they have whole Slack channels for recruiting people. And any problem that you face, somebody else has faced it before, or they can recommend you to their friend who has solved it, right? So picking an investor who has an excellent network, even if it's not purely biotech, there are other things you're going to have to solve that are not purely biotech that other people have done before. So having at least one lead investor that has a long track record, it has really happy founders who come back to them over and over again for their next companies, those networks are super important.
Yeah, I totally agree with everybody. And I think going off of what Sam was saying with an investor that has a really great reputation kind of gets to the credibility question, helps to build your credibility as a company. And then also for us, being fortunate enough to raise from 5 a.m. for our seed, being a more traditional biotech life sciences investor, they knew a lot about the pitfalls that we didn't know about, and were able to really just give us a lot of advice, and just directly from themselves, in addition to connecting us to advisors. But in all of our board meetings, it was like we were learning new things, we were seeing things we wouldn't have otherwise seen, and getting just really, really useful advice from people who had seen many, many companies go through the rodeo.
And there's definitely funds out there that actually have like an in-house, design team and like more practical things to help with, or, legal or little things that you can finance, accounting, definitely. So there's investors that have that. So I'll have the inverse thing of the bad thing about bad investors is that if they have control, they will make you do things that they think are cool, and you will definitely not agree with as a scientist a lot. And they'll be like, why don't you go direct to consumer? And like things that you don't necessarily agree with. So the harm that a bad investor will do is, I would feel a lot worse than the benefit that a good investor will bring in, if that makes sense. Because you can always find networks on your own and advisors and whatever, but undoing damage is a lot harder.
Well, thank you guys. So let's bring an applause to the panelists. Thank you for coming. And we have some food outside.